I'll do a quick introduction of myself. My name is Tong Zhang. I am the executive director of Oregon MESA. I'm so excited to join you all today. We're finally getting some sunshine in Oregon. I know the rest of the states have gotten really hot. We've gotten nothing but rain for the last 8 months. So this is kind of joyful for us to actually be able to get some sun. But I am going to get us started today. So today I have the privilege of being able to facilitate a panel with the MESA USA alumni that are established leaders in STEM. I'm so excited to be joined by a couple of them today, and we may have another person who will be joining us a little bit later. Like I said, I am the executive director of Oregon MESA, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming our panelists. And I'll give them more opportunity to introduce themselves. But they are Tony Rodriguez, who is the Chief Technology Officer of Digimarc. We have Dr. Gwen Perea Warnemint joining us from the Legislative Education Study Committee from the state of New Mexico, and Dr. Anthony Roll, who is the Dean of the College of Education from University of South Florida. I'm so excited to be able to facilitate and moderate this panel. I will largely be just kind of moving the show along and let them be able to answer some questions. And then we will also please encourage you to pop questions that you have um, in the chat into Q&A. We'll take it from there. But I'm going to stop sharing because I think it would be great to be able to see the panelists that we have today. So I think maybe what I'm going to do first is actually give everybody a chance, the panelists, an opportunity to introduce themselves and maybe give some quick, you know, some quick updates about their bio and their current career. So I am going to actually throw it over to Gwen first and have her introduce herself.
Well, thank you very much, and buenas tardes. Yes, tardes in New Mexico. Thank you, Mr. Jakowski. It's nice to see you on the chat. My name is Gwen Perea Warnemint, and I am new in my position, actually, as the director for the Legislative Education Study Committee here in New Mexico. I can tell you a little bit more about this position and why I went down that route, but just briefly a little bit about me. I am from New Mexico. I went to public school in New Mexico, including elementary, middle, high school, attending the University of New Mexico Highlands University, and finally New Mexico State University. So fully educated in our beautiful state. I did not intend to be a teacher. And you'll hear more, I think, a little bit about this and the impact of MESA on my life. I was very interested in STEM education, computers in particular, actually. When I was very young, my father was an engineer at the National Laboratory in Los Alamos. And for a variety of reasons, of which I can share also a little bit later, I didn't pursue that career. Instead went into the direction of education, but became really invested in STEM education in particular, and looking at it as a mechanism of access and equity. My PhD is really focused in STEM education, and I also feel very deeply that education is about community health. So STEM in that space is a really important, I think, mechanism or driver towards that. I have two sons. I think a little bit about me that's important. I have two boys, one that's 17 and the other one that's 19, and they are why I do the work that I do, as well as all of the children and students and families in New Mexico. My mom is an educator, my sister is a professor of chemical engineering, and another sister is a social worker. So my family is very invested in this interesting nexus and space of education and STEM. Um, I am just coming off of a 3.5-year stint as a deputy secretary for the deputy cabinet secretary for the public education department in New Mexico, and that was certainly heavy and intense, and maybe the most I've ever learned in my life, given what we went through in COVID. So that's a little bit about me, and thank you, Tom. I'm glad to be here with all of you and with the panelists.
Oh, we're so glad to have you, and I can imagine it. Yeah, that's a tough position to have been in the last few years, not to mention the important work that you did there before. I think we're going to continue with the education track and go to Dr. Anthony Roll and have him do a quick introduction of himself and share a little bit more about his current career.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm particularly excited. I've been waiting for this for a long while. You can just refer to me as Anthony, Dr. Anybody, or Dean Anybody. I'm originally from MESA, California, from Yerba Buena High School in San Jose, California. I'm very excited. Thank you, Roberto Chavez, who was the director at the time back in the Stone Age when I was there. For me, MESA was kind of a lifeline. Child of a single parent mom who taught preschool education. And at the time, when Mrs. Hooper, my high school counselor, first encouraged me to join MESA, she basically said, "You are too short to play professional football or even football in college," because that's where I thought I was heading. And she says, "You're good in math, you're good in science. Let's be realistic." And so for a young kid to hear that, it was kind of shocking. But Mrs. Hooper, along with Mrs. Lucille Sapiens, were great guides and mentors. I attended Santa Clara University in the Bay Area, majoring in mechanical engineering and computer science at the time. Literally got burnt out my junior year and said, "I'm going to law school." But I was fortunate to hear a lecture from a budget analyst named Aaron Wildovsky. He was an excellent budget analyst, and he talked a lot about budgeting and education. And that was really the first time I had heard, my gosh, you can take numbers and apply them to politics. And I was just fascinated. So after Santa Clara University, I went off to the University of Washington in Seattle to study applied public policy. I ended up working for the Senate Ways and Means Committee during an internship where I could apply all my mathematics and applied econometrics. Literally fell in love with that analysis. Again, was very fortunate to meet my next mentor, Neil Theobald, who said, "If you're interested in applying mathematics, you should study school finance and economic policy." Fascinated by that, I took a class from him. And at the time, he transferred to Indiana University, where I studied my PhD, and my doctorate is in education, finance, and economic policy. And ever since then, I've always studied how states give money to kids for public education, how states spend money for public education, and the results that spending can actually achieve for kids, particularly related to organizational efficiency writ large, but also particularly to providing equitable opportunities for access to these education systems that most kids in public schools don't have. And particularly being a poor kid and reflecting on the pathways that I had, I always asked the question, how can we continue to create those academic pipelines for kids in order to provide them an access where they can work hard, be productive, and be successful? So since the time at Indiana, I've worked in Washington, D.C. for the National Education Association. I worked at a number of universities, North Carolina State University, Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, University of Houston, and the University of South Florida now twice. I was here once as the department head, and now I'm here as the dean of the College of Education. And as a child, I'd always told myself if I ever had the opportunity to bring MESA and its opportunities to students, young adults, teachers in the districts, that I would. So I'm very fortunate to have had support both at the University of Rhode Island. I don't know if y'all are on the call today, but it's nice to hear you. If you get on, where we first started MESA program about 2 years ago. And then now that I'm here down at the University of South Florida in Tampa, we're starting all over again. So if David Rosengrant is on the call, thank you for all your support, sir, and helping build this out. And we are looking forward to our university designate, Dr. Louis Visat, to come on July 1, who will become our point person in our MESA development. So I'm very excited to be here. Thanks, everybody. Look forward to chatting, answering some questions.
Thank you so much, Anthony. And we do have Case, the group from Rhode Island, who just chimed in the chat. And so, yes, thank you so much, Anthony, for starting programs in Mesa in Rhode Island, as well as now in Florida. And so now we're going to go over to the other Tony on the panel. We're going to go to Tony Rodriguez. And I think that there was also some connections in terms of the Washington connection. So I'm going to have Tony do some introduction of himself. Welcome.
Terrific.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Delighted to be here and honored to be with the other panelists here. But my journey with MESA actually shares some similarities with what Anthony just shared. And I can elaborate on that a little bit later. But MESA has just been profound in my career, and really the doors opened for me. But a little bit on my background. So I grew up in Oregon and Washington, going through public schools, but changing public schools quite a bit with a single mother, and just we were moving a lot. And by the time I got to high school, I was really struggling and had convinced myself I couldn't do math. And even though I was interested in computers, I just really didn't see much of a path forward. And that's when MESA stepped in. And again, I'll elaborate on that in a little bit later. But if when I fast forward now and think about where I am today as the CTO of Digimarc, we're a company that got started about 25 years ago here in Portland. I was one of the early principals in starting that company. But to see us, with 350 people in the company, most of which are engineers, many of which are PhDs in a variety of technical fields, it's just sort of astounding for me to look back at where I started from and what MESA, really allowed me to do. A little bit more on my role today and why MESA continues to play a really important role for me, and how I think about, just from a pure, frankly, hard-nosed, just CTO engineering perspective. The success of Digimarc and the success of my team over the last 20 years in creating a massive patent portfolio, creating technology that's been globally deployed. In fact, all of you are exposed to it. It's in all television, radio, movies. You just don't see it or hear it, because the whole point of this technology, which is called digital watermarking, is to remain imperceptible to the human visual system and auditory system, but to identify things like audience measurement and like. But what has enabled that technology to be built, and all the companies that we've worked with, has been this incredible diversity of thought that has driven innovation. And that is the key to how we as a small company have built an asset that many of the largest IT companies in the world license from, and we continue to innovate. And I credit that all back to again, MESA, and being around a lot of really incredible students and people that I would have never been exposed to. Um, and then as outside of work, I also find myself as going a little bit like you shared. I find myself with a 19-year-old and a 20-year-old, and it's been really amazing to watch them go through the public school system and see how much better things have gotten, but also where we're still lacking and where the barriers are. And so that's also been really important to me, both in my continued involvement with MESA, but also as a company founded in Portland with deep roots in Portland, is how can we make the world a little better, kind of just nudge things along, irrespective of stock price and capital creation and all that, right? It's how do we make the world a better place? And so so I'm really fortunate that I get to keep keep a foot in both worlds, and thanks to Tong and some other organizations I've been able to stay involved with, it's been incredibly rewarding. So a little bit of background. Oh, and that's the daughter right there over my left shoulder, which I always forget that she's looming over my, wondering when tuition is going to be paid next. So um,
I love it. Thank you so much, Tony. And you can already tell, I think, from this panel, that there's a lot of, even though everybody's in very different positions and all over the country, there's a lot of interesting connections. I think the first question I'm going to, or I guess the second question I'm going to ask is really, let's going back to sort of the beginning. And everybody's alluded to this a little bit, but I'm going to kind of combine a couple of my questions, which is about how, if you could share a little bit, is like, what are your kind of first memories about MESA? How did you get involved with MESA? And how did that impact, kind of your decisions later on in terms of choosing your career? And Maybe for this one, I'll let anybody who's ready to chime in, and then maybe I'll also let the next person. But yeah, I'm always really curious to hear about people's first kind of interactions with the program. So Anthony, yeah.
Oh, sure. I just unmiked. I wasn't planning on going first, but I am going to have to give a shout out to my two girls too. So I have a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old rising sophomore studying biochemistry at Howard University, and a freshman who's also interested in studying biochemistry. So much smarter than I ever thought I was ever gonna be. My first memory of MESA actually was one that's kind of funny. I'm sitting there in my football pads after school going, oh my God, I'm gonna be late. I gotta run all these extra sprints. Why am I sitting here with all these dorks, right? But as they started talking about not only academic opportunity and economic opportunity, I started to listen. For those of us who did not grow up with wealth, finding avenues for success where you could begin earning income was particularly important. And when they said that if you stay in this program for 1 year, during your sophomore year, you will have an opportunity to have a paid internship at a local computer corporation, I said, this might be the program for me. And so my first memories were, how do I stay successful as a student so I can take advantage of those opportunities later, not even knowing that the program, as we all know now, is both remedial and accelerative, provides lots of opportunities for networking and mentoring. And really, it was Mrs. Hooper and Mrs. Sapiens who kept saying, just stick it out for a year. If you don't like it, you can quit. Just stick it out for a year. And thanks to them, I actually did. And from there brought wonderful opportunities. Most kids will talk about how, my first job was at a fast food restaurant or doing some other kind of work. And I can proudly say that my first summer job was working as a programmer at IBM in their Santa Teresa lab. So wonderful experiences to see professionalism, to have folks who are performing their work every single day at a place like IBM. And for a kid like me who literally did not even know that the lab was in San Jose at all, you learn about professionalism, you learn about professional diversity, but more importantly, you learn kind of the social structural conditions that are beyond where you grew up. So you can see pathways to additional types of success, however you define success. But you see these alternative pathways that lots of other students weren't able to see. So this program for me is particularly important in that vein because it helped me grow and increase not only the vision for myself, but vision for others.
That's incredible. Thank you. Tony and Gwen? Who would like to? Gwen, go ahead.
Sure. So I started getting involved in MESA when I was in junior high school. There was a teacher who was sponsoring the club, and a lot of my friends had done sort of team sports, and I didn't really do team sports myself, and I was a little bit I liked the camaraderie that was happening, but I knew that that wasn't really my space. And I was actually always really uncomfortable with the competitive nature of team sports. Like I understood it, but it was like not, it didn't sit well with me. Like I didn't get it. or whatever it's worth. And MESA was like this cool group of kids who were really collaborative and really not competitive in a weird way, but still together and still this awesome team dynamic. And also they were interested in sort of STEM stuff, which I was. And I convinced a girlfriend of mine, to join with me, and she just joined for about a month or two and then dropped out. But I really loved it and found just like a space where I felt connected, I guess, and valued, and that the things that I valued were valued, and saw that reflected back in me. And that, as you begin to grow, and you're that young, but when you see things that make sense to you and you value and you see it reflected in something else, that's really meaningful because your identity is shaping, right? And so it was just really beautiful. I think in terms of how it's impacted the whole trajectory of the career. It's not just the content. It's, I think, that space of like relating to others and supporting one another in projects. And also I remember the one thing about MESA, which was really fascinating to me now at this point in my life, the one thing about it was that I loved was going to different locations for these competitions or these thinking about competition, or these events essentially that you would travel to do. And the one that was meaningful to me the most, which is interesting, was debate and public speaking. And I found that fascinating because I found that there's this whole world around and wrapped around what we perceive as STEM. So
I love that, and that's so true. Yeah, and I think that the connections that you mentioned are so important, the connections to people and the relationships that are built. Tony, you want to take it?
Sure, sure. Um, so yeah, my path in many ways, again, has some similarities with Anthony's as well. For me, coming into the high school in Seattle, I changed schools quite a bit. I didn't know anybody there, and it was also at a time when, thankfully, Seattle was incredibly progressive with the busing program and really driving, a lot of students to intermingle across, different schools. But the result was I was at a school where I didn't know anybody. It was, about 45 minutes away from my house. So it wasn't like there's a neighborhood connection. And, when I first heard about MESA, it wasn't anything I pursued. Thank goodness MESA pursued me, because at that point in time, I had convinced myself that, I wasn't capable of doing math, that algebra, my brain didn't work that way. Even though I had this interest in computers and science, I had already convinced myself that wasn't a world for me. And part of that was just, as Anthony stated, just not having any visibility into, what those pathways look like and what does it mean to be an engineer, and frankly, what the economic sides of that were. That was all just opaque to me. And so when MESA first came to me, or the MESA program was just starting at our high school, and the science teacher approached me, my first response was like, "Are you kidding me? You want me to take another science class, something that I've convinced myself I'm not very good at?" And he persisted, and so I ended up joining the class and building that sense of community with a number of kids that I knew, but I didn't really travel in their circle at that point in time. And so it was great to realize, wait a second, there's other students, and this is in the dark ages before everyone had a computer, at home, that there were other people that were interested in computers and interested in that aspect of technology. And so that suddenly made me realize, wait a second, there are other kids like me, and I'm able to have these really interesting, fun conversations with them. But even then, I enjoyed all that, but the real tipping point for me really was the doors that were opened by the MESA director at the time, Patricia McGowan, at University of Washington, and setting up company tours. And so very early on, we went and toured Honeywell, which was kind of the outskirts of Seattle. And for the first time, it wasn't like people walking around in lab coats with slide rulers in their pockets. It was like real people. There weren't too many people that looked like me and my friends, but whatever. It was like real people. And they were speaking English, not for the most part. And so to get to see that and get a sense of, oh, wait a second, this is what it means to be an engineer. And then I was very fortunate that my first job was actually at Honeywell. Not quite the bona fides of IBM, but still, it was pretty amazing. And it was incredible to find myself between my sophomore and junior year, interning there and being able to make contributions to an engineering team. And that's when it suddenly just clicked. It was like, oh, I get it. All these things that I think I can't do, I just need to figure out, how to get the tutoring or the help to get through these hoops, to get through these classes, because I now know definitively that I can make a contribution. I may not be, the idea of CTO is still completely, I wouldn't even know what that title meant, right? But the idea that I can at least make a contribution in an engineering team that just lit the fuse. And then from there, it was, sort of off to the races. So that's really, kind of my earliest experiences with MESA. And then that second summer when they started paying me, which was just an incredible amount of money at the time. They started paying me $8 an hour. I was just like flabbergasted. My friends were making 325, flipping burgers, and I was, getting paid $8 to sit in an air-conditioned office and get to play with cool equipment. So it was a pretty quick ramp into the world of engineering thanks to MESA. So
I loved all of these stories. I think that some of the things that I take note of is there's a lot of identity formation that was happening in these different experiences, and also just like so much exposure, whether it's traveling, whether or not it's like being able to get folks yeah, just into companies or into new universities and everything, that is such an important aspect of the program. And so I definitely take that away. One of the things I'm curious about is you are all either more involved with MESA now or just at least a part of the MESA community. I'm curious, some of you have alluded to this. Why are you still interested in MESA? And, why do you think this work that we do about increasing equity in STEM is still important? It's a really big question. So I understand that yeah. So who wants to maybe tackle that first?
I can I can take a first stab at that. And it's a big question. It's a huge question. And to me, there's, that can be sliced so many different ways. But maybe I'll take two slices at it. Uh, from just a very hard nosed, you know, we're a small tech company that, has to innovate. That's how we survive. That's how we grow. That's how we build. And what has become so clear to me during my time at Digimarc, but even, at my previous jobs, and again, I was really fortunate with MESA to be at Honeywell, and then I went to CenturyLink, US West at the time, but CenturyLink, then Jet Propulsion Laboratory and IBM. By the time I finished those co-ops and internships, the one thing that was just absolutely clear to me was that all the teams that innovated, all the teams that really made a difference, they had the most diverse people and diverse backgrounds, educationally, culturally, across the board. Those were the teams that really set the standard. And then when I finished school and ended up at the Intel Architecture Labs here in Oregon, that's how I ended up back down here in Portland. I saw the same thing. And so, you know, when I've seen it now in the small and building this team over the last number of years, the reason that we've been able to do the kind of innovation that we've done, and frankly, not take no for an answer or take it, and see a challenge and just overcome, right? Is that the individuals on the team, they come with so many different backgrounds and experiences that they bring all these unique perspectives on a problem. I mean, we'll get inspiration from weaving, like knitting, for a signal processing algorithm, and then we'll turn around and get, inspiration from telescopes, from an optics perspective. And, that has been just central to the creation of really our assets as a company. So there's a very hard-nosed sort of business, answer. Um, but when I step back, what is actually more rewarding and more profound is really the societal side of it, and really opening those barriers, opening those doors, and eliminating those barriers. And part of that again is tied to just the commercial side. We can't fill these positions with these innovators if we're not eliminating the barriers downstream, upstream. And so that's incredibly important. But then just the ability to participate and see how companies can be a force for good, in a community, and how to set those pathways, and working with MESA has also been really rewarding. And frankly, also something, here I am going back to the commercial side of it again. It's actually something that increasingly, when we're hiring engineers, they ask about, what's whether you want to put it under the ESG banner, but how are we involved with the community? How are we making the world a better place? And we have an incredibly high participation of our engineers with MESA, Infraall, Chick Tech. I mean, there's about 6 different, STEM related fields that, or STEM related organizations that we're involved with. So there's a lot of private sector commercial sort of take on that answer. I could elaborate, much longer on the societal side, but I'll leave that to Gwen and Anthony.
Thank you, Tony. So, yeah, talking about the importance of STEM education and why we want to continue programs like MESA and your involvement. Yeah, I'm curious from either Gwen or Anthony how you see it. What is the importance from your perspective?
Oh, I was gonna wait for Gwen, but I'll just go ahead and jump in now. Um, my my grandfather is an immigrant from the Bahamas on my father's side. And on my mother's side, my grandfather was a sharecropper. When we moved to California in 1970, I was 3 years old. So we were right in the midst of Cesar Chavez and the Grape Farmers, United Farm Workers and the like. And my mom, of course, growing up in the South, always had an idea that to have some type of opportunity. And as individuals who were able to have those opportunities, it was incumbent upon us to provide additional opportunities for others. And I kind of giggle because I studied economics for so long, because economics is not equitable. Economics is based strictly on competition. Gwen, I don't know why you didn't understand that. And so the problem with competition, though, of course, is that there are winners and losers, and economics doesn't provide a space for those who aren't at the top of the game. And as somebody who was born not at the top of the game, for me, providing additional equitable opportunities to allow young kids and high school kids pathways to perform is inherently important for a lot of the reasons that Tony was discussing. There are so many kids around me who were just as bright, just as knowledgeable, just as interested in science, but got sidetracked by some of the negative aspects of poverty, gangs, drugs, violence, all those other things that come into play where, you're so easily derailed because you really can't see beyond another year. And typically folks are saying, if you just hang on for 6 years, you're going to be in a great position. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't put food on the table. That doesn't take care of your family. That doesn't provide the type of immediate satisfaction that folks need to learn and grow. So when MESA opportunities came through, it literally was a breath of fresh air. Those types of opportunities then began to grow. And as I began to learn more, because I really didn't know anything beyond doctor, lawyer, and a teacher, you begin to understand that those folks who are particularly successful, number one, very much well educated, have strong networks, and the vast majority of them who don't have some previous type of economics of support, however defined, their advantage is they know math. Their advantage is they know science. Their advantage is they know some form of technology involved with all that networking and all that other learnings and understandings that give them a comparative advantage. And once I understood that, even though I studied political science and public policy for a long time, I knew, because I knew technology, I could program computers or write code. I knew that because I knew math, I could construct, complex econometric equations, that I always would have an advantage. And I want kids to know, whether they choose this field or not, that if they know more math and more science, even if they don't use them every day, they'll have a comparative advantage when they compete, even if they're an attorney, even if they're a business person, even if they are a teacher. They will be able to have a multiple perspective on issues of the day that can provide students with increased amounts of opportunity.
Yeah, I'm gonna also follow that up with a plug for STEM teaching is so important. So obviously, and so going to Gwen, I know you have a very large statewide perspective on the importance of education, specifically in STEM education, and I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Sure. I'll try to build off of both of them because Tony and Anthony, I think spoke very eloquently of. I like the questions. I think the first question answers the second question probably for all three of us. That the the work to increase equity in STEM is still important, and therefore that's why we're still interested in being involved in MESA. But you're right, Hung. It's sort of like a immediate, medium, long-term goal. And so immediate, I think, is exactly what Tony was speaking about in terms of diversity of voice equals better product, it equals better understanding, right? So diversity of voice is essential and part and parcel of a better and comprehensive, complex product, for lack of a better word. Better ability to understand policy, right? So if I look at my team and all of the analysts and I bring them together, the better I am positioned in terms of the diversity that they bring to the table, the better we are going to be in producing recommendations, budget policy recommendations for the legislature. So that's sort of immediate. The medium goal then is exactly what I think Anthony is speaking about in terms of the impact on the individual and access, right? And that is access that impacts them and their families for their life and their trajectory, but is very critical, right? And it happens sort of immediate and sort of in the works of what's happening there. I think, though, that this long-term and societal impact that Tony was speaking about at the beginning is more the space that I tend to exist in, and certainly I think in looking at a statewide, if not global level, and that is when you think about communities and or the issues that we face in the world, those that are most proximate to the issue are those that we should lean on and ask to join to the table to help solve the problem, right? And so to do that, they need fundamental knowledge and skills, and we need them at the table. So in order to protect land, in order to understand the dynamics of where we are going in terms of whether it's climate change or weapons or whatever, their representation, right? And I say this in looking at New Mexico and our Native American population, and that I always want to recognize and bring them, ensure that they are represented. So this like idea around, even medicine as a female, that right, that access is not just about the individual, it's about society as a whole. So I guess shifting the dynamics around what is STEM education, and that it's accessible and it's something that we are all engaging in at every moment.
I love the way that you frame that. It's just, I feel like, it's kind of summarizing it. It's good for the individual, it's good for society, it's good for business. So, but I see Tony, were you going to add something?
Yeah,
else?
if I could.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely. Yes.
yeah, what you shared, Gwen, just remind me of something. It's just very well stated, and of course, your background and perspective on all this, far surpasses mine. But one of the things that's troubled me for a long time is, look at the tool we're using right now. Look at the world we're in right now, where everything is intermediated with technology, right? Those technologies and those tools that define the reality that we live in and that our kids are growing up in are coming from a singular worldview. And it's usually frankly, a male-dominated worldview of privilege, right? And if that's the lens that all of us are left with to communicate and work with each other through, we can, the large, companies and, people can make statements that doesn't affect, how we see the world, but we know that to not be the case, right? And so getting these, as Gwen, it was just your comment, Gwen, of getting, these views together, right, to build these tools and to build these technologies and how we interact with each other in the world, it's beyond profound. It's just absolutely necessary. I mean, I don't know how we succeed as a society if we're viewing everything through these singular lenses and technologies. So just wanted to kind of throw that on top as well.
Thank you so much, Tony. I am going to kind of shift gears a little bit, kind of piggybacking off of that. gonna jump around in the questions. So I am wondering, I think given all of that, that everybody was sharing about the importance of this work, as an established leader in your field, I think we can comfortably say you're all very established leaders in your field. Just really amazed by the diversity of experiences that people have had. What kind of lessons do you want to share with others, especially emerging leaders from underrepresented backgrounds? Kind of like, understanding that not everybody is coming from the same situation, but just like, especially I'm looking for, like being just really blunt with everybody about like, obviously we know that mentorship is important. Programs like MESA, I think, are important, but like anything else, I feel like that you might be able to give in terms of tips that, like, because I think that young people, especially, are unfortunately still going to be entering a world that have a lot of barriers, and especially if they're going to go deeper into the STEM fields, a lot of systemic inequality that exists. So, curious any sort of lessons that you want to share with others. Again, kind of a big question, but I think you all can handle it.
I'll start with some like just initial reflection by listening to Anthony and Tony. And certainly this is true for me, but it was beautiful just to kind of hear in the panel and be part of it. One thing that maybe MESA has done, and or the space of really understanding or looking at the world with STEM as part of your frame, it's not the entirety, but it's certainly part of it, is that you look at knowledge as generative and you make connections where, you look for, there's a quote from, I think it's Coleridge, it's like similitude and dissimilitude and similitude. You're constantly making connections where things might not have ever been connected. And I think that ability to, so for instance, Anthony, in economics and STEM education, right? When you're like listening to Tony, right, and thinking about like entrepreneurship and the value of diversity in entrepreneurship, like these connections are super dynamic, and keeping yourself in that really curious space at all times when you're listening and in all different fields and with all people, and that you're valuing everyone's voice because you will, in doing that, you're honoring the people that you work with, and you're elevating what is STEM, and you're making it accessible in a way that you don't even understand, you don't even realize that you're doing. So.
That was great, Gwen, because it leads me the opportunity to say this. With all that that we've been talking about, the one thing that I think it's important to know is that you cannot be afraid of isolation, and you cannot be afraid of being, quote unquote, the only one as you pursue these spaces. I've always been the adventurous sort. There's been many a times where I was either the only one from my city, the only Black guy in the class, the only person who didn't have a background in whatever. You still have to be fearless. You have to find that mentor wherever he or she may be. Sometimes it's in the classroom, sometimes it's outside the classroom, sometimes it just happens randomly. But find that person that you can talk to who can give you support you need to continue. Because we always can't enter a space where there's a cluster of like thinkers. We always can't enter a space where there's a cluster of folks who have the same cultural experiences or immigrant experiences and like. Sometimes you might have to be the first, even now, which I think is hilarious. 40 something years later, we're still talking about how people of color and low income people and women need to go into STEM. I graduated in 1984. I'll put it out there. And I'm like, we've been having these conversations for 40 years. Why can't we just get it together and give people opportunities to compete? But apparently the folks who are already in power don't want us to compete. So when people don't want us to do something, we need to get ourselves together and kick doors down. And then there's a nefarious part of this too. One of my best friends, Dr. Manhertz, he also has a PhD in economics. He's a Jamaican man. And when I first got to Indiana University, I walked into my economics class and there's this Black guy sitting there. And I went, oh, that brother's in the wrong class. what does that say about structural racism? That because I had not seen people of color in my classes for so long, when I finally see another Black guy, that I don't think he's in the right class. And what's even funnier, he and I are best friends. He was a best man at my wedding and the like. He tells the same story. So we have to make sure that we get past our experiences and the structures that are with us so that we continue to be successful in a variety of spaces. And MESA really helps us overcome those things by providing us with new opportunities and spaces where we can be successful and productive.
Yeah, that's both a great and funny story, but also, yeah, it definitely highlights the continued problem that we have. Yeah, Tony, curious about your thoughts about this.
Wow. Yeah, I don't have a lot to add because it's so well stated. And Anthony, now that you've outed your graduation date, 86 here, so we're right, right at the same time. From a everything that Gwen, especially Gwen, the picture that you painted of making STEM accessible just by our presence, right, and allowing others to basically synthesize what those experiences are across those boundaries is so true. Whether people go into a STEM related field or not, Anthony, your point about just having that little bit extra math, having that extra little bit extra science. I think that was actually my conversation with my daughter about twice a week when she was doing homework at night and struggling with with things um but I'll take maybe again more of a private sector or a career engineering perspective on the question. um and it goes back to something that Anthony said, which is that you know anybody who has moved into STEM from an underrepresented community or with economic difficulty, you already are breaking barriers and changing perceptions, right? And you're already demonstrating the mettle that it takes to be an engineer and to tackle challenging problems and to be to be adventuresome, even if you don't think of yourself that way, right? To Anthony's point, and those are all incredibly important skills. And they're also, again, I'll go back to innovation. They're the foundation of innovation. Is you have to be fearless. And I don't think of myself as a fearless person, but I don't take no for an answer, or very rarely, unless it's coming from my wife. So it really is something that I think I learned through my personal experiences growing up, and then through MESA, and seeing what I was able to overcome with the help of MESA. And so that comfort with, what, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to, I might fail. That muscle has been central to my career. And, I would just say to anybody who is, starting early in their engineering career, or actually any career for that matter, if you're somebody that, wants to innovate and wants to change and make a difference, you have to continue to not be afraid to fail. And frankly, I'll say this for the engineers that might be listening that are starting their careers. If you're in an organization as an engineer that won't allow you to basically fail or penalizes you for failure, it's probably not a place that's destined for success. You have to be able to innovate. And I think that's true across the board. So I would just throw that out that, those are lessons that I learned from MESA that I carry forward really sort of every day in my career.
I loved all of that. I think in it, I heard some. There was like a rallying cry. I think at one point from Anthony, where we're all gonna just break down doors or something, and then also I think individually, I think being bold and um, yeah, realizing that it is going to be tough, I think, on the individual. And, but I think it's also on us as the folks who are, in companies and in institutions to be able to smooth the ride a little bit more. I think I think probably last question, because I think this has been such a vibrant conversation so far, is um, it's also another difficult question. And it's a spin on the question I shared with you all, which is um, how do you think, instead of, I think my original question was about how do you think other alumni could gain from MESA, is I wonder from your point of view, what do you think that as a whole, MESA alumni has a power to do in terms of either shaping? So I think individuals, this is our first sort of initiative in getting alumni together across the country. We've all kind of done things individually in our different states. But yeah, if you have, and you can throw out wild ideas out there, what do you think alumni of MESA could do either collectively or as individuals in their state? I'm curious to see what ideas and thoughts that you all may have. And you can think of this as just like a sort of like a task list for us, as MESA directors now to go and do and, organize people. But yeah, I'm just curious what you all think.
Well, I'll jump in. I know we only have about 5 minutes left. I think it's important, number one, just to convene across the states and across the subdivision in states and give, folks like us and other MESA alums the opportunity just to meet. I still have a small cadre of folks who were my MESA alums way back from, the mid 80s, and we still chat and we talk about these issues of opportunity, how technology changes lives, where may technology go, how do we continue, like both Tony and Gwen were saying, to create that space where not only can students be imaginative, but initiate aspects of that imagination in terms of either study or creating a new idea, a new patent, whatever it is, to keep new ideas flowing from multiple perspectives. So I'm excited just to know that we're going to try to start convening MESA alums, because I'd be very excited to hear what they've gone and what they've done and where they want to go. I think that'd be particularly exciting. So I will definitely jump on the link and see what's going on back on the east side of San Jose.
I'm going to build off of what Anthony's saying. I think he's exactly right around the power of convening. If there's one thing I think that some of our students need, at least I don't know. I think this is the case, and I see this is the case at New Mexico. I think a lot of our high school and middle school students need to know what careers actually look like and feel like and sound like the tangible career, right? Like, what is Tony doing and what does that look like in his space, right? To be able to imagine from point A to point D, right? And how to make that connection. Similar to Anthony, like how did he get there and what are all of those pieces that led to that space? And then what does his job look like right now? What does it actually physically look like? What am I doing standing right here behind this desk, right? Like that, for kids to know that and be able to understand all of the complexity, because right now when we say engineer, there's a visual frame of what that means. And I'm not sure that that's true, right? Or it's limiting in a lot of cases, right? Same as a physicist or whatever it is that we say, even if you say computer scientist, the visual imagery around that is not complex enough that it's allowing them to say it could be anything. And I think we try to reinforce that in education, but it's not tangible enough. So for alumni to have a project and directors that were actually doing that for students would be very meaningful.
Great.
Yeah, I guess all I would add is I think just the sheer act of, and this was brought up previously, of convening, of actually surfacing what is now, 30, 40 years of MESA graduates that have changed the world, full stop. And surfacing that history, that pool of potential mentors, that pool of, even if they're not mentors, biographies that students could see, oh, I'm interested in this. Hey, this MESA alumni from the program that I'm in, they're doing something related to what I'm interested in. Or look, this person became an astronaut. Whatever the case might be, I think just the act of surfacing that is huge. And the other thing it does as well, and Tong, I'm throwing this out. This is, more your world than mine, is that, it's, NESB, SHIP, SWE, ACES, I mean, all amazing programs, right? But pulling all the energy together, right, under the banner of MESA, because I think probably many of us were members of those organizations as well, just to basically have a unified voice that, this is the reality of what engineering looks like. It's not the movie The Social Network. The world does not look like that or behave like that. These are the real leaders in the STEM field, and of course that spans into education and all the other areas that basically support MESA and STEM as well. So that's I think that's something that would be profound.
I love these visions that people have shared. And I will say that also most rooms that I go in, and this is around Portland and in other spaces, I'll say something about how I work at MESA, and some random person in the back will be like, oh, I did MESA. And that is such a regular experience that I have, regardless of the type of environment I go into. And so the stories that we really definitely want to capture. And I'm so grateful to the three of you for sharing some of your stories. I can't believe we've completely run out of time. I've really, really enjoyed this. I think that what I'm going to do quickly now is do a quick wrap up, which is just sharing with everybody. We've mentioned this a few different times, but just really recognizing for people that MESA USA, we are a consortium of statewide MESA programs representing now 10 states across the country. And we all collaborate together to broaden participation and improve academic outcomes for underrepresented students in STEM. And so as a whole, we serve more than 50,000 students annually. And if you think about that throughout the time that we've existed, which is like Tom said in the chat, 52 years, that's a lot of incredible alumni. And so we hope that this is just the beginning of our work together. And we hope to get a lot more alumni convenings and other interactions in the future. If you are an alumni joining us right now, please join us on the MESA USA Alumni LinkedIn group. We're just getting that started and starting to post more opportunities. And if you are a teacher or MESA USA staff, this is part of the convening that has been going on for the last couple of days. So please, there's a 1 hour break before our next activity for the teachers and the MESA USA staff. I want to say thank you again, Gwen, Anthony, Tony, so much for joining this panel. I really enjoyed it. So just deep gratitude to you all and for the different work that you continue to do in your different states. But I'm going to give everybody one last opportunity to say something before we wrap up. Not, just want to say thank you. And that's it for everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us.